Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I am your host, Myra Rath, and I am very, very excited to introduce today Joe Stillwell. And we're going to be having a conversation today about his encounter with some beings, and he's going to tell you all about it. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Joe. So in 2011, he was involved in two close encounters, which he describes as the most magnificent moments of his life. In 2022, he published a book detailing those events titled Into the Blue of Wanderers, Invisible Children, and Astral Voyagers. Joe is a retired paramedic, having worked for a municipal fire department for 11 years before transitioning to a regional county fire authority, where he worked for another 12 years before retiring. Joe is also a U.S. Army vet and served in the Vietnam conflict. He is married, lives with his wife in a small Southern California coastal community where he grew up surfing at the local beaches. You surfed for 40 years, wow, before being sidelined by injury. Joe can also be seen on YouTube by searching Breaking the Silence and viewing his four-part series. This is produced by Steve Neal. He can also be heard on the Alien UFO podcast hosted by Simon Bown. It is broadcasted from the UK in a July 1st, 2024 interview. Welcome, Joe.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
I'm so honored to have you here, and it was very serendipitous how we came together. My sister and your friend know each other.
That is correct. My friend from high school, who has been a close friend my entire life, apparently knows your sister.
That's right.
I had given my friend a copy of my book after it was published, actually her and her entire family. And apparently, sometime in the not too distant past, she has mentioned to your sister that particular book or that story.
Yeah,
And I guess your sister mentioned it to you.
she did.
It piqued your interest and you wanted to speak to me about it.
We did, and this kind of happened very quickly. I don't know if I emailed you or called you, one or the other, but it just moved so swiftly and quick. I feel like we're really meant to do this.
Well, I hope I can answer all of your questions.
Well, it's going to be a great story. So, why don't we start with what happened to you in 2011?
I live in a small Southern California coastal community, and in 2011, I had two primary close encounters, one occurring on March 1st, in the early hours of March 1st, 2011, the second occurring in the early hours of July 11th, 2011. These were the first times in my life up to that point that I realized that I had experienced anything like this. I considered these to be the first encounters in my life.
Mm.
Since those encounters occurred, I have come to realize they were not the first, but they were certainly, as I have indicated, just the most magnificent moments in my life.
Yes, yes. I actually watched that documentary on YouTube, and it's really interesting because it has the visuals of, as you're describing it, the visuals of what that might have looked like. And it was just like, oh my gosh, wow. Especially the second one, when they came into your room, right? So why don't we talk about the first encounter that you had when you saw the ship?
In On March 1st of 2011, I had gone to bed at a normal hour. I awakened in the night and used the bathroom, came back to my room, and went to the west-facing window in my room just to look out at the night sky. I wanted to see if I could see the constellation Orion. At that time of the year, I knew where the constellation was in the sky, and that particular evening was a dead calm, crystal clear, a remarkably bright moon. And I looked out the window. Up to the left is where Orion and the moon would have been. And I looked to the left, and I caught sight of the constellation Orion. Almost immediately after setting my eyes on the constellation, out of the periphery of my right, to my right, I detected something moving in the sky. And I turned to the right to see what that was. And there was a flying craft moving very slowly, coming from the west, moving slowly toward the rear of my house. It was coming from the west, and I was looking out a window facing west. So it would, as it came up to the rear of my house, it would have been parallel to the rear of my house. That was the direction of its flight.
Okay. One of the things I remembered was how they described the lights. Well, you described the lights. That was very unusual. Can you describe what those lights look like?
The structure was shaped like a brick. And when I initially caught sight of it, it was just up in the clear sky. It wasn't low enough. The altitude was high enough that there were no earthly references that I could compare it to try to determine how big this thing was. I couldn't tell if it was very far away and quite small, or I'm sorry, very far away and quite large, or close and quite small. But as it came closer to the house, I could determine quite easily it was enormous.
Wow.
It was solid black, seamless, no windows or doors, non-reflective. The lower perimeter of this thing, the underside perimeter, was encircled with very large red and green lights, with each one the alternate color. So it was red, green, all the way around the bottom of this thing. The lights were shaped like footballs, standing on their point, with one point attached to the craft and one point facing down.
Okay.
And there were four equally spaced points around the perimeter of these lights that was turned off, that was black. And those 4 points rotated around the lower perimeter, kind of like the old bulbs that you would see around an old theater marquee, where they would turn
Yes.
on and then off and on and off, and
It was alternating.
it looked like everything was rotating. That's what was
Yes.
happening with these lights. There were 4 black spaces, and they rotated around the bottom as each successive light turned on or off. The lights were enormous. I indicate in my book that they were shaped like footballs, but easily twice the size. They were more than twice the size. They were quite large. The green was a very dark green, like you would see in old Christmas tree lights. And the reds were just a brilliant, bright red. Same thing, like an old teardrop Christmas tree light, the very dark red that would be.
Wow. Did you hear anything?
There was no sound.
Okay.
There was no disturbance of the air around this thing that would indicate a propulsion source that was emitting some kind of exhaust.
Mhm.
It moved very slowly. It was moving maybe 10 miles an hour.
Mm.
And as it approached the back of my house, I watched as it disappeared behind the back of my house, I kind of pressed my face up against the window to watch for as long as I could until it disappeared behind my house. And um, as I now had my house to reference against the size of this thing, I could see how close it was. It was only about 25 feet away from the back of my house. And it was just enormous. I estimated that it was at least 40 feet wide, at least 30 feet tall. And in the book,
Wow.
I indicate that the sides were about 3 times as long as it was wide. So about 120 feet, 130 feet long. It was just gigantic.
I want to ask you, okay, when you saw it, did it occur to you what you were seeing? Like, what
No,
was your thought?
that's a great, that's a good curiosity. No, when I saw it, it was just so beautiful
Mm,
and so unusual that I was just mesmerized. I mean, I truly could not take my eyes off this thing. It was just so incredibly beautiful and unusual. So I
hmm.
just watched without moving at all until it disappeared completely behind my house.
And you didn't run to another window to the other side of the house to see if
Once
you
it
can
dis
catch.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, once it disappeared behind my
Mm,
house, my thought was that it's just going to continue moving by the house, and I want to go watch this thing fly away. So I turned from the window with with the intent of walking out my bedroom door, across the hall to the bedroom on the other side, and looking out that window, which faces east, to watch this thing fly away. Once I turned and started to walk to do that,
hmm.
I only managed one step and I stopped. Um, I hadn't intended to stop. I hadn't wanted to stop. I just stopped. I was completely paralyzed, standing,
Mm.
although I must have been breathing normally. And I had thoughts, but they were irrational thoughts. My my concern should have certainly been my paralysis, but I had no thought of that at all. My only thought in my head was, move, go. You're going to miss this thing. It's going to fly away and you're going to miss it. Let's go,
Right.
go, walk. So in my mind, I was just mentally talking to myself, trying to get myself to move.
Mm. And you couldn't.
I could not. I was completely frozen in a standing position.
Do you know how long you did that feel?
I do not know how long I was in that position. I do
Okay.
know that I was in that position for a relatively short period of time, and then this happened. I call it my awareness. Uh, you may identify it as something else, but I was paralyzed, talking to myself, trying to talk myself into moving, and I came out of my body. I came out through my face,
Hmm.
but I only got a short distance out and I got stuck. Uh, and I could feel that I was tugging and I was stuck. Uh, I could feel that it was on each side of my head near my temples where there was this kind of pressure. I could feel myself tugging against those parts of my head.
Hmm.
And after a couple of tugs, I broke free and I came out of myself.
Hmm.
And I was completely free of now my physical component. I,
Yes.
I no longer possessed my physical component.
Right. You're in an astral space.
I don't know where or what I was, but I was out of myself.
Okay.
I call it my awareness.
Okay.
Um, I only had two realizations. in that state of being.
Mm.
The first was comfort. Um, it was a perfect balance of everything. I have never felt a level of comfort like that. I don't think it could be surpassed. It was absolute perfection.
Mm.
The second realization was a vastness, an endlessness of nothing. It just seemed to be a vast, endless, I don't know, I just call it a
Yeah.
realization.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it just was a vastness, an endless vastness of nothing.
Mm. Okay. And so that's really interesting because, in the work that I do, um, a lot of my clients have those experiences where they are not in their body, but you have no memory except that of what happens next. Is that correct?
Yes,
Mm. And so, what's the next thing that you remembered?
I am now back in my body. I am
Mm-hmm.
myself. And I am moving away from that position, from that point in my room where I was paralyzed. I am walking. The door is a little bit to the right, and my bed is to the left. Of course, the doorway is where I, in my head, am intending to move.
Mm-hmm.
And my first couple of steps are in that direction. But once I pass the bed, I turn left and walk down the side of the bed and sit down in the center of the bed. Uh, the foot of the bed was what was facing the direction where I was paralyzed. So I walked
Okay.
past the foot of the bed, turn left down the right side of the bed, and go about halfway down the bed and back up to the bed and sit down. Obviously, that was not where I had intended to go. And once I was sitting,
Mm-hmm.
again, I started talking to myself mentally. And what I was saying,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of funny now, but I was saying to myself, get up. Why are you sitting down? Go to the door, go watch this thing fly away. You're going to miss it. It's going to fly away and you're not going to see it. Um, and of course, uh, that's not rational.
Right.
So um, uh, I believe that while I was out of my body,
Mm-hmm.
something happened to me to remove that rational aspect and that control I had over my body. Once I was back in, I recognized I was back in my body and I recognized the room and I recognized my intent.
Mm-hmm.
But I no longer had control over what I was doing. Um, my body was doing things on its own that I had no
Right.
intention and I had no control over it.
Interesting. Did you notice any loss of time?
At that point, no. I, again,
Mm-hmm.
was not thinking rationally.
Right.
Uh, and maybe that was an effect of something that was done while I was out of my body also.
Mm-hmm.
I, I was still thinking about going to watch this thing happen, fly away. My concern should certainly have been, why did I turn and come and sit on the bed and have no control
Yes.
over that? Is something wrong with me? But that was not what I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm. What were you thinking about?
Well, when I sat down on
Okay.
the bed, which is not where I wanted to be, I was trying to talk myself into getting up, as I said,
Yeah.
and um, I was struck directly in the center of my chest by this searing point of heat. Um, I mean, it was just searingly hot.
Mhm.
It struck in the center of my chest and radiated um, out, you know, through my torso. It was so hot that immediately I felt water coming off of my forehead. And when I had sat down, my arms were on my thighs in front of me, and water just started pouring out of my forearms. So water
Wow.
was coming out of my head, out of my forehead, and out of my arms, and I recognized that. Um, I mean, just profusely
Wow.
dripping out of my arms and my head. That that point of heat, it was only for an instant that it struck me, but it caused that immediate reaction. And immediately I fell forward. My torso slumped forward. Um, not only did that heat elicit that physical reaction, but it also um, removed virtually all strength that I had in my body. Virtually all,
Mhm.
not all, but almost all strength immediately was gone. And I fell forward, caught myself with my forearms on my anterior thighs and stopped myself from falling further forward. And I was in that position. My head was drooped forward, looking down between my knees.
Mhm.
And almost immediately, the room just illuminated brilliant white, a blinding white. The entire room, it seemed, just um, lit brilliantly. And when that happened, I did lose the last little bit of strength or energy that was left in my body, and my torso fell forward. My arms came off of my anterior thighs, and my torso fell forward all the way down to my thighs, and my head
Mhm.
drooped uh, down between my knees. So I was looking at the floor, uh, and these dark shadows that were being cast by my lower legs.
Wow. Were you at this point, did you have any fear of the loss of control and energy? What were you thinking?
Uh, No, to this point, I had no fear at all.
No fear.
Never, no, to this point, I had experienced no fear.
Hmm.
Um, no, I don't even think I had curiosity.
Mm.
I was just trying to regroup, uh, trying to make my body do the things that my head was telling it to.
Yes.
Um, but at this point, now that I was looking at the floor and these very dark shadows, um, I really wasn't thinking about anything. I remember just looking at these incredibly dark shadows, and I was mesmerized by this brilliant whiteness that was in the room.
Mm.
Uh, I was not in that position very long, I don't believe. And a thought came into my head. I do not believe that it was a thought that originated in my mind. And the thought was, they are at the window, don't look.
Wow.
Um, and almost as soon as that thought occurred, I was kind of lifted up into a sitting position and then plopped over onto my left side onto the bed.
Mm.
Now, from the position where I had collapsed on the edge of the bed, it would be impossible for me to fall over onto the bed.
And so when you heard they're at the, like you think it was a thought, that it was your thought saying, don't look, they're at the window. You think that was you? Or do
No,
you think it was a message?
I believe that was a telepathic thought.
Yes, I believe that too. I believe that too. Wow. Okay. What happens next? You're laid back on the bed.
Yeah, I was lying on my side on the bed. My eyes immediately closed. And all I was thinking about, I just had curiosity about uh, why my feet were still on the floor. And they immediately felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I mean, they felt incredibly heavy. And all I could think about was, why are my feet so heavy?
Right.
Why can't I move? Because I couldn't move at all. I was paralyzed again. And why can't I open my eyes? I recognized the light was still in the room,
Hmm.
but I was completely helpless lying on my left side on the bed. So I struggled to move. And after a very lengthy struggle, managed to move a couple of fingers on my right hand and got that hand over to my left knee and grabbed a hold. I was very concerned that my feet were gone and I wanted to recover my feet.
Hmm.
And I pulled with my right hand and my leg, I couldn't move my leg. So I struggled again for a very lengthy period of time and managed to move the two fingers on my left hand and got it over to my right hand and grabbed my right wrist. And with my two hands locked together, pulled as hard as I could. And eventually my foot did come up off the floor and I dragged it up onto the bed. Having that success, I knew I could recover my right foot. So
Hmm.
after, again, a very lengthy struggle, um, had the same success with my right leg. And now I was on the bed in a fetal position on my left side.
Hmm. What's the last thing you remember about that night?
That um, that is my last memory. I was
It
laying on the
was.
bed in the fetal position. I
Hmm.
recognized the light was still in the room, even though I couldn't open my eyes. But I
Hmm.
also recognized there was something happening in the room. I don't
Okay.
know where that realization uh,
Yeah.
originated, but I knew that there was something going on in the room.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I opened my eyes, and it was the following morning.
Wow. So you have no idea how the length of time that this encounter actually took?
No, no.
No.
And the following morning, when I opened my eyes and recognized that it was the following day, uh, it was only then that the craft in the sky that had come up behind the house
Yeah.
became a concern. And that was my primary thought and concern that morning.
You remembered everything.
I remembered,
Or you remembered what you just told me.
yeah, I remembered
Yes.
everything that I just conveyed.
Hmm. Okay. Now, were you alone in the house when this happened?
Yes, I sleep in a different room than my wife,
Hmm.
and I was alone in my room. The windows were closed, and my
Hmm.
door, the door to the room was closed.
Okay. But she was in the home.
She was in the house. She was just
Hmm.
down the hallway in the master bedroom.
Okay. Okay. All right. Wow. So, how many months later did your second encounter happen?
That one occurred on July 11th, 2011. So about 4.5 months went by,
Hmm.
and I had a second encounter in the same
Yeah,
room.
before in the same room. Now, before you go into your second encounter, the time period between the two, what changed for you?
Uh, After that first encounter,
Hmm.
um, when I had awakened the following morning, that seemed like something important had occurred. And I wrote everything down that I could remember about that encounter. But I also
Hmm.
felt that I needed to tell somebody. Somebody needs to know about this. This seems
Hmm.
important. So I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know who to contact. There is no central telephone number you call to report these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Eventually, online, I found the Mutual UFO Network
Hmm.
and read up a little bit about them and thought that was probably the best avenue to report this. And they have monthly meetings, and there's a city quite close by me, just about a 20-minute drive, where they have where they hold their monthly meetings.
Oh, that's good.
Um, so I went to a meeting just to see what this organization was about, and ended up liking what I saw. So um, I had written everything down that had occurred, and I decided I'll report this to these folks.
Okay.
But before I could do that, I had the second encounter.
Okay. So let's hear about that.
That one occurred in the early hours of July 11th in the same room that I've just spoken about.
Hmm.
Uh, I had gone to bed at a normal hour that night. Uh, I hadn't done anything the prior day, uh, or taken any medication or had any alcohol that would have affected my mental state or my mental acuity. Um, so I just went to bed, was sleeping, went to bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. And I was awakened by a relatively loud noise, and a very odd noise. And it woke me up. It sounded like if you blow a large bubble of bubble gum and it pops, it makes a kind of a muted popping noise. It's not a real sharp popping noise, but it's pretty loud, but it's muted. And I immediately opened my eyes. It woke me up. I was on my back and was immediately confused. I was completely confused by what I was seeing.
Hmm.
I was in a pyramid that was comprised of all of the blankets on my bed. Um, they were touching the tops of both of my shoulders. And then the pyramid rose straight up from that point. And it was probably about 3.5 feet tall. It was quite tall. And I was looking straight. My head was the only thing that was not inside this thing. So I was looking straight up at the face of this thing. And the the whole room was this beautiful blue. Um, it wasn't a solid light. Looking straight up on the ceiling, I could see these undulating lines of blue intertwining and undulating across the ceiling and down the walls. Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful cobalt blue. But I
Right.
also was in an odd position. I was flat on
Mm.
my back with my legs extended. My knees and my ankles were together, so both of my feet were straight up. And my arms were tight against my sides with my palms against uh, the lateral aspect of my thighs, as if I was standing at attention, lying down. A very, very odd position.
Yeah.
And I'm inside this pyramidal structure.
Mm.
Um, I studied this structure for quite a long time, not understanding what was occurring, and eventually determined that I need to find out what is the source of this light that's moving throughout the room. And I could tell that it was coming from near the bottom of the bed or the foot of the bed.
Hmm.
So I knew I needed to get this structure out of the way. Um, Now, obviously, at this point, I didn't recognize this at the time, but as I'm telling the story, you can tell this is not normal behavior.
Hmm.
Obviously, waking to that, I should have just reached up and grabbed it and gotten it all out of the way and, what's going on here? Uh, why I was studying this for so long, I don't know. And when I went to move it out of the way so I could see the source of the light, I moved very slowly. I moved very cautiously. So again, that's just not normal. I should have just sat up and knocked it out of the way. Just sit up and
Yes.
just sit up and knock it out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved very slowly. I brought my arms up very slowly from my thighs, got them out of this structure, and then grabbed onto it very low and pulled down. I thought the whole thing would just collapse, but it didn't. Only the part of it that I grabbed onto collapsed in my hands. The
Oh.
rest of it remained rigid, as if it was solid. And when I pulled down,
Did you feel anything?
yeah, when I grabbed it, it didn't feel like the covers on my bed,
Mm.
which feel very puffy and thick.
Sure.
Um, it collapsed in my hand as if it was tissue. It
Mm.
just almost felt like air. It
Mm-hmm.
just collapsed in my hands. And when I started to pull, there was no resistance at all, none. But I recognized when when the whole structure started coming down,
Mm.
it didn't collapse. The thought in my head was, I can let go right now, and this will still float in the air. Uh, and in my mind, I recognized that this structure was defying gravitational force. It was not falling like it should. It was just
Yeah.
floating.
Wow.
So I pulled down, and because I had grabbed so low, it only came down a short distance, and I could not see over it to the source of the light.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to grab again and pull. So I reached up higher, grabbed and pulled down as I started to sit up. And as it got out of the way and my head came up, I saw the source of the light. Now, this all happens in a split second because you see
Yeah.
it all at once. But I will describe the source of the light since we're talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
The far end of the room, the far wall of the room, which from my head to the far wall is about, I don't know, I'll say 13 or 14 feet, maybe not quite that far. And where the ceiling met the far wall, come out about 18 inches and go up about a foot. So down and back, it made this kind of there was kind of this rectangular structure that was across the whole end of the room where the ceiling met that wall. The side that faced me was this deep blue. The side that faced down, or the face of it that faced down or toward the floor, looked like the surface of water that's been agitated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you put your hand in a calm swimming pool and just kind of agitate
Right.
the water
Yeah.
during the day, the shadow patterns that are formed on the bottom of a swimming pool, all those dark patterns that are moving and intertwining,
Mm-hmm.
that's what that inferior surface looked like. It looked like
Yes.
agitated water. The
Mm-hmm.
side that was facing me was just as if you cut water with a knife, but it remained there. It was just this flat blue surface that was transparent. I could see into it. Um, and that's what the whole part of where the ceiling met that far wall looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the source of all the undulating light, all the undulating blue light that was coming across the room.
Okay.
Immediately
Wow.
at the foot of my bed, there was someone standing there. It was very big,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not human. It was directly at my feet, and it was looking slightly to its right as I raised my head and saw all of this that I'm describing.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about that?
Well, it's funny. I'm already seeing it in my mind because I saw your documentary. And so I was just waiting for you to bring up the being, which, by the way, I know that you have created like a sculpture head of this being that was in your room.
Yes,
And so I'm very excited to share that also with the community. It's enormous.
it was very big.
Wow.
And as I said, I only had my head raised. I had not started to sit up. I had raised my head as the structure had come down. And once I saw all of this right in front of me, I stopped moving. So my
Mhm.
head is raised um, from from my face to where this creature is standing. It is just over 5 feet. I mean, it's very close.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, it could be closer, but it couldn't have been much closer. So I was able to see this very clearly. Um, the this water-like structure was emitting enough light, all of these lines of light that were coming across the room,
Mm.
was illuminating the room pretty well. And the creature was also lit, although I refer to it as dark, being dark as opposed to being illuminated. It
Mhm.
was lit. It was dimly lit white. It had a white glow to it. And it was wearing a cape. Um, so the only part of the creature I could actually see was from its chin up. I could only see its
Mhm.
head. The cape was cinched at the chin
Right.
and then splayed as it hung to below the foot of the bed. And it splayed pretty significantly. It was quite narrow here, but by the time it got to the edge of the bed and then went below the bed where I couldn't see it, it had splayed easily, uh, I'll say at least 3 feet in that distance. Now, the
Mm.
creature was between 6 and 7 feet tall.
Okay.
The head was more than twice the size of an adult human head,
Mhm.
and it had a crest on the top of it that was spread very broad and rolled under at the back.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and as I said, it was looking to its right as I first caught sight of it.
Why do you think it was slightly looking to the, like, what was there? Do you think? What do you think?
It appeared to me the room at the time was being I was renovating the house, and the room at the time only had my bed in it. There was no other furniture.
Mhm.
Uh, there was no carpet on the floor. I was painting the room at the time. The only thing in the room, to the right of the bed, there was a cardboard box.
Mhm. Hmm.
It it appeared it appeared to be looking um, toward that box. That's all I'll say about that.
Okay. Okay. Mm.
So it was looking to the right. Now it wasn't completely turned,
Mhm.
um, but at some point in this encounter, I did see it fully from the side. I don't
Mhm.
know how that happened, but that did happen. When I initially caught sight of it, its head was turned, I don't know, maybe about 30 degrees to the
Okay.
right. Enough, it was turned enough that I could see some structures on the back of its neck,
Mhm.
and some of the stuff on the underside of the crest uh, that
Yeah.
was on the top of its head.
Mhm. And again, like the first encounter, did you hear anything while all this was going on?
No,
The only thing you heard was that pop.
that was the only sound
Yeah.
during this entire encounter
Mm-hmm.
that I heard, the only sound. As far as I can recall, this entire encounter happened in silence.
Yeah. Do you feel that there were any messages that were conveyed to you?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond they are at the window, don't look, from the first encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, During this encounter, uh, when I initially caught sight of the creature, when I initially got the pyramid out of the way and raised my head and saw
Mm-hmm.
all of that before me, um, even though the creature was looking to its right, it immediately, almost immediately, it lit blue.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, the cape that was covering it was opaque. It was very dark. I'll just call it black. It had vertical folds, so it appeared to be cloth or something like cloth.
Mm-hmm.
But the head was all I could see of the creature. That illuminated blue. Every part of it illuminated except for the eyes. This brilliant blue, beautiful, beautiful blue. It stayed lit for a couple of seconds and then went what I call dark, but it went back to its, dim light, dim white light. So it illuminated, went
Mm-hmm.
dark, again, went dark, and a third time.
Mm-hmm.
It went dark, and then it pulsed twice and remained what I call dark. At that point, it turned and looked directly at me. And that was the only time I saw it move.
Wow. Okay. And when it looked directly at you, what did that feel like to you?
Again,
Mm-hmm.
I I don't believe I was in my normal state of mind as anyone
Mm-hmm.
would be, um, because my response, well, my response already was not rational. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you wake up and there's someone standing at the foot of your bed, um, there are two things probably you should do. One is either just attack, or the other is to flee.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, well, the attack part would have been, I could have done that. The flee part, I could not have done that because this creature was between me and the door, uh, or between the door and me. So there was no way for me to get out of the room. Um, but I had no fear. Once I caught sight of
Right.
this thing, and was able to watch all of this that I've described happened, I was just looking at it in awe. I was not
Yeah.
fearful at all. I had no thoughts of attacking, and I had
Mm-hmm.
no thoughts of fleeing. So something I think had already been done to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but once it turned its head and looked directly at me, I had a thought. And I don't believe that it was a thought that originated in my mind. I
Okay.
believe this was a telepathic message. And the message was, don't resist, it will be futile. So I
Wow.
just laid there with my head raised, looking directly at this thing, which was looking directly at me.
Mm-hmm. And so I have a question that may be personal to you. Okay. But what do you think they were doing in your room? What do you think was transpiring there?
I, I think at some point, uh, this thing was trying to convey a message, I think.
Mm-hmm.
either that or another suggestion that has been put to me is that maybe they were taking something from me,
Hmm.
some information from me. Uh, but I think there was a transfer of information.
Okay.
Uh, Now, if this thing was trying to convey a message to me, it was not a message that I could understand,
Hmm.
um, because there comes a point where there were a lot of symbols displayed for me, and I have no idea what those symbols represent.
Hmm.
I also understand why that would be necessary. If indeed, don't resist, it will be futile,
Hmm.
is a telepathic message in a language that I understand. If this thing can do that, why not just give me any message in English telepathically that you want me to hear?
Yeah.
Why display all of these symbols, which I can't understand?
Hmm.
But if it was taking information from me, it's possible that these symbols that were being displayed in front of me was a method that could be accomplished in
Yes.
its world. I don't know. But those are the two thoughts that I have about that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I really don't know what it was trying to do. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay. And do you have an awareness of time? How long this was or what time it was?
Uh, yeah. From the time I saw this thing at the foot of my bed,
Hmm.
um, until until everything in my room that it did. Um, I mean, it was a very lengthy show in my room. It was just magnificent. From
Hmm.
the start of that, from the time I was awakened until the last thing I remember happening in my room. In my mind, that seemed like quite a long time. And when I say quite a long time, um, it, it seemed to me that that probably all was at least 45 minutes
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
before I have no further memory.
Hmm.
Um, but it seems like quite a long time to me.
Hmm. Okay. That night, did they kind of put you to sleep like the first time? Did it feel that way?
It was different than the first time, but
Hmm.
yes, the answer to the question is yes. There were
Hmm.
periods in this encounter where I was not aware. Now,
Mm. Okay.
I don't know if I was unconscious,
Hmm.
um, but there are blank spots in this encounter. Um, and then there are moments when I don't think I was supposed to be aware of what was happening, but there are brief moments where I was. Uh, but the short answer is yes, there are periods where I was not aware.
I remember in the series how you were describing that it was your room, but not your room. And I know that you and I spoke before I hit the record button that it was almost like a projection of your room. Do you feel that you left your room and were projected maybe onto their ship?
I agree with the first part of that. I feel that, yes, there was a point where I am certain I was no longer in my room.
Hmm.
Um, it, it was all magnificent
Yeah.
from start to finish. There was a brief period of time where I was in terror, but the rest of it was just magnificent.
Hmm.
But yes, as you described, there was a point of time where um, I thought I was in my bed. I thought I was in my room, but I didn't recognize much of what I was seeing. It did not appear, much of it did not appear to be my room.
Right.
And I
Hmm.
don't, yeah, looking back, as I've had time to think about this over the years, yes, I agree with you. There was a point where I was no longer in my room.
Mm. Okay.
I
Have you?
don't know where I was, but
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
not in my room.
Yes. Okay. Wow. And so anything else that took place that night?
Uh, well, at some point, that blue band on the ceiling that looked like the suspended surface of water,
Hmm.
that eventually, that seemed to go away for a while. Um, it may not have, but I was unaware of it for a while. And then there came a realization where it was back. But instead of being just at the far end of the room, it now um, was all the way to the foot of my bed. So that water-looking substance spanned wall to wall, the width of my room, wall to wall, and then from the far wall all the way out to the foot of my bed, which would be maybe about 8 feet.
Hmm.
And then from the edge of that, nearest my bed. Now, this thing is from wall to wall. And from the nearest edge of that, the edge near my bed, there was a vertical transparent panel from floor to ceiling and from wall to wall. It looked like a giant panel of glass. Um,
Mm.
there was glare and reflection on the surface of it. It was perfectly flat. It was perfectly transparent. It was easy to see with my head raised, because this was only about 5 feet away from me, that this
Yeah.
was a large glass looking panel.
Hmm.
Um, it was just magnificent.
Yeah.
The area above the creature that I say looked like that agitated sea surface, I could see up through that, just like you can see through very clear blue water. And that part of the room, the ceiling, the attic, and the roof, that part of the room was gone. I was not imagining
Wow.
it. I was looking right at it from very close,
Right.
and that part of the building was gone. What was there
Wow.
was a tunnel, um, a beautiful blue tunnel.
Mm.
It seemed to be made of blue light.
Hmm.
I could see up into it quite a distance. Uh, and that remained there um, for the rest of the encounter.
Hmm.
That remained over the creature. That tunnel was there for the rest of the time. But eventually, after this panel appeared, uh, symbols started coming down this thing, starting from my left, the upper left corner of this thing, as it faced me. And they ran down it diagonally and down. They ran from the upper left down to the lower right as they came down. And
Hmm.
eventually the panel was filled with just thousands of symbols coursing across it. They were
Incredible.
blue, some were white. Um, I recognized none of them. They were just odd shapes. And kept, they just kept coming. Uh,
Hmm.
as I said, they originated in the upper left panel of this, or upper left corner of this panel. And once they got the panel abutted the far wall of the room, and once the symbols made it over to that far wall, they just disappeared as if they were going into the wall. Um, but they never stopped coming down from that upper left corner.
Mm.
And eventually two symbols appeared that for some reason really caught my attention. I seem to be very focused on these two.
Hmm.
Uh,
Did they
One
look
I thought
familiar?
what's that?
Did they look familiar?
I don't know why they caught my attention,
Okay.
but two of them did.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One of them looked like a fish.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a barracuda, and following about 6 feet behind that were two adjoined crescents with an appendage attached at the bottom. And
Mm-hmm.
those, as they came down amid all these other symbols, they eventually disappeared into the wall, as everything else did. But they seemed to reappear up in the far left corner again and would transition and reappear. And they just seemed to be on a loop. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the symbols did not
Mm-hmm.
seem to be on this loop,
Interesting.
but those did. They seemed to, I don't know, it seemed like
Yeah.
we need you to see these two. These are important ones we need you to continue to see.
Okay.
Um, so those two caught my eye and I remembered those very clearly. There were a couple of other symbols that I remembered, the shapes, but and I've drawn them, but they don't seem to have any meaning that we would know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would call those codes, symbols and codes that you were receiving, or like you had mentioned, they were pulling him out of you, right?
Yeah,
We don't know.
yeah. The person that told me that, she is a UFO researcher, uh, very smart lady, and she's been looking into these phenomena for many years. She was the one that came up with that thought that rather than trying to convey a message to me,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they were trying to take information from me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
I can't possibly know if either
Right.
one of those things is true.
Yes. What's the last thing you remember of this encounter?
Uh, uh, the creature, uh, the symbols on this panel, and I'm holding my
Mhm.
fingers up, I'm sorry, but
It's
uh,
okay.
started getting sucked down into the center of this glass, what looked like a glass panel across my room. They started getting sucked down um, to below the foot of the bed to where I couldn't see them any longer. And they started going counterclockwise um, up surrounding the creature's caped body or surrounding this cape.
Mm.
And once they got up to shoulder level to where I could actually see its head, they stopped rising and they just started circling faster. So all of these things are
Wow.
getting sucked down, going up around the creature faster and faster and faster until it was completely obscured in this cyclone of symbols.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now, as I said, they were blue and white. Some are blue, some are white. As they went faster and faster around this thing, they started disintegrating as they collided with each other. When the white ones um, collided with other white ones, they sparked significantly as they disintegrated
Mm.
and threw off sparks upward into the air and out. Um,
Wow.
in ultra slow motion, they went up and then they just dropped very, very slowly downward. And as the speed of the cyclone appearing structure increased, so too did the sparking because all these symbols were colliding. Um, and eventually, this thing was surrounded by a skirt of this, what I call glitter. All of this sparking light just formed a skirt of glitter that was falling in slow motion
Mm.
around this thing. as that all was happening also, a circular structure appeared around the head of this thing vertically. Beautiful light yellow. I call it soft yellow. This structure appeared, it looked like it came out of its shoulders. Actually, I'm referring to a human.
Uh-huh.
It didn't have shoulders. The
Mm-hmm.
cape, it
Wrapped
didn't
around
have
its neck.
shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
It just appeared to come out of the side of it and
Yeah.
up around its head,
Mm-hmm.
and surrounded its head in this beautiful soft yellow
Mm-hmm.
halo. Just magnificent to see.
Mm.
And at that point, I just remember um,
Mm.
the whole thing came up off the floor. It came up into the air. Um, so it was just this swirling cocoon of light around the creature. Its head was visible, and it had this beautiful yellow, very large yellow disc around its head vertically. And it came up off the floor. Um, and that's the last thing I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Then I opened my eyes again. I opened my eyes, and it was the following morning.
Oh, wow. Wow. I'd love to ask you if you believed in other life, other races outside of Earth prior to this. Did you
Yes,
believe? You did.
yes. Since
Hmm.
I was relatively young,
Hmm.
11 or 12 years old, I have always believed that there there are other planets that are
Hmm.
that are inhabited
Hmm.
by other creatures.
Yes,
I
yes.
have always believed that.
Wow. Joe, how has this encounter, both of these actually, you've had more than these two, because I know that there was something else that took place in a car.
Yes.
But how do you feel this has changed you?
You know, as I said earlier, I really don't notice
Hmm.
anything different uh, because I have always believed in this.
Okay.
It hasn't changed that outlook.
Hmm.
Um, I physically uh, don't seem to have any lasting effect from
Hmm.
that, those two encounters. Um, I it, I am atheist,
Hmm.
and again, I have been since childhood.
Always. Okay.
So it hasn't changed my outlook
Hmm.
uh, in that field either. In fact, uh, I believe, and I truly believe this, that I have seen up very close what ancient men would refer to as a god.
Hmm.
And this particular one did not look anything like what modern man portrays
Hmm.
them to be.
Yeah.
Um, that is just my personal belief.
Sure. Okay.
Please just hear me out and understand that this is just what I know.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. And you wrote a book. What is the name of your book? Tell us about that.
The book is Into the Blue: A
Hmm.
Wanderer's Invisible Children and Astral Voyagers. It's available on Amazon,
Okay.
either in ebook form or in print. Um, and if you have any questions about the story that I just told, some of them probably will be answered in the book because it talks more in depth than I've been able to today.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and telling us your incredible story. Thank you.
Well, I am happy that you invited me, and again, I am proud to be able to get to share this with all who will listen.
Oh, of course, of course. Thank you again. Thank you, Joe. And thank you for listening, everyone. Be sure to also check out his book and also the remind us of the series that you have on YouTube.
If you want to see me describing this in a little bit more length and more detail,
Hmm.
uh, on YouTube,
Yes.
the internet site YouTube, if you search Joe Stillwell's Encounters, I
Hmm.
should come up. It is a series produced by a fellow named Steve Neal, who has devoted um, uh, a series called um, Breaking the Silence to experiencers like myself. And you can not only see me describe the encounters that I have had, but other folks describing their encounters,
Yes.
which may interest you also.
It was excellent. I enjoyed it. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me today.